Welcome back to Study Hall, everybody. Hope you're ready to dive into something pretty heavy today. Something, well, you've probably seen in the news a lot lately. And, well, let's just get right into it. We're looking at this, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and, well, a recent executive order that, well, honestly, it kind of threw everything up in the air. We've got, like, the actual order right here, signed just a few days ago on January 20th. Of 2025. And we've got some analysis, too, laying out the potential pros and cons and all that.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. This order's got people talking, debating, It's important to hear both sides, try to understand where everyone's coming from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this order, it's called
Right.
Realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program. And right off the bat, I mean, it doesn't mess around. It suspends the entire program. Like, that's a big deal. Just imagine for a second you're someone who's, seeking refuge in the U.S. I mean, this order changes your whole world, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a huge shift in policy, and it's happening fast. The order goes into effect on the 27th, so just a few days from now. We're talking about a major pathway to safety and resettlement in the U.S. just suddenly slamming shit for a whole lot of people.
Yeah. And they give the reason for this suspension as, well, they say they can't manage the number of migrants and refugees coming in. They claim it impacts resources, safety, the ability of these folks to integrate into society, all that.
And it's interesting, right? Because the order actually names specific places like Charleroi, Springfield, Whitewater, some big cities too. New York, Chicago, Denver, all these places, they say, all around are being overwhelmed by migrants. It almost feels like they're trying to call out communities that might be, more likely to agree with suspending the program.
Right. And then there's all this language about national security, public safety. They're really focused on vetting, making sure only people who are deemed not a threat can get in.
Yeah.
And they're giving states and local areas more control over where refugees are placed. That's a pretty big change from how things were done before.
Yeah, no doubt. That shift toward localized control, that's got to be one of the biggest parts of this whole thing. Basically, they're handing over power, which, could lead to a real patchwork of different approaches across the country. So does that mean things will be more efficient? Will it be better for local needs? Or will it create a bunch of inconsistencies and maybe even some unfairness in how refugees are treated? Lots of questions there.
A lot of questions, yeah. And then they mention these case-by-case exceptions. So even though the program's suspended, they're saying some people can still be admitted if they're considered to be in the national interest.
Right. And that's where it gets really tricky. What does national interest even mean in this context? Who's making those calls? Is it about skills, professions, family connections? Who knows? The order is super vague about all that, which leaves it wide open to interpretation, maybe even manipulation.
Yeah, it's a lot of power in the hands of just a few people. It makes you wonder about potential biases and whether some groups of refugees might end up at a disadvantage because of it.
It's important to remember this isn't exactly new territory for the U.S. We've had these kinds of exceptional procedures for refugee admissions throughout history. Certain groups get prioritized, often for political reasons or because of, like, that perceived national interest. Think about the Vietnamese boat people back in the 70s, or even more recently, the special programs for Ukrainians. This national interest thing, and that shit kind of echoes those past situations. But it also raises some red flags about fairness, and whether everyone has an equal shot in the selection process.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's important to see this in a broader context, historically speaking. Okay, so let's look at some of the arguments they're making for this order. Our analysis here lays out some of the potential pros and cons. And one of the big arguments in favor is this idea of increased public safety. They say stricter vetting will help keep out people who might be a threat.
Right, and that's a tough one, or it's a really complicated issue. On the one hand, any government, they've got to think about the safety and security of their citizens. That's a legitimate concern. And after some of those high-profile incidents, involving people who got into the country as refugees, well, it's understandable that there's going to be public pressure to, make the vetting process tougher.
But then, doesn't that take us down a dangerous road? I mean, could we end up discriminating against entire groups of people?
Yeah.
Just based on where they're from or their religion?
Yeah.
How do we find that balance between legitimate security concerns and practices that might actually be discriminatory?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The challenge is to create a system that can actually identify potential threats, but is also fair to everyone who's seeking refuge. And if we get too hung up on security, Well, we could end up excluding people who aren't actually a threat at all. And at the same time, we might be reinforcing harmful stereotypes and kind of chipping away at our commitment to, basic humanitarian principles.
Okay, so another potential benefit they bring up is this idea of resource preservation. The argument is that by hitting pause on the refugee program, it gives communities some breathing room, time to adjust, to use resources more effectively, and to make sure that existing services aren't being completely overwhelmed.
And that argument, it really hits home for communities that are already struggling, lucked up places with limited resources or that have seen a huge influx of new people in a short amount of time. The worry is that if you don't have proper planning and support, then a big wave of refugees could put a strain on local infrastructure, housing, healthcare, education, everything.
Right, but isn't there also an economic case to be made for welcoming refugees? I mean, there are studies that show refugees can be a real asset to their new communities, both as workers and as entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. History's full of examples of refugees who came with nothing and ended up becoming successful. Business owners, scientists, artists, community leaders, they enrich the fabric of their new countries. If we shut the door on refugees, we might be missing out on a lot of talent and potential for economic growth.
So it seems like there are legitimate points on both sides of this debate. It's all about trying to balance competing priorities, right? Security versus compassion, economic benefits versus limited resources, local concerns versus global responsibilities. What do you see as the most important part of this whole discussion?
For me, it always comes back to the human element. We can't forget that. We're talking about real people, real lives, hopes, dreams. These are individuals who are running from persecution, war, violence. They're just looking for a chance at a better life.
Yeah, it's so easy to get lost in the policy debates, the abstract stuff. We got to remember the individual stories, the human cost. So how do you think this order is going to affect the lives of people who are trying to find refuge in the U.S.? What kind of challenges are they going to face?
Well, the most immediate consequence, I think, is a loss of hope. For a lot of these people, the U.S. represented safety, a place where they could, start over, rebuild their lives, be free from fear. Now that pathway is closed, at least for now, so they're stuck in limbo, often in situations that are really precarious and dangerous.
It's tough to think about, the desperation, the uncertainty. They're facing an unknown future, and they're running out of options.
And even beyond that immediate impact, there's the long-term psychological toll, Being displaced is traumatic enough on its own, but then you add the stress of waiting indefinitely, being separated from loved ones, the constant fear of being sent back to the very danger they were trying to escape.
And even for those who do manage to get in, under this national interest exception, things aren't going to be easy. There are still going to be hurdles, like learning the language, adjusting to a new culture, and potentially even facing discrimination.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even when you get access, resettlement, and integration, it's a long and difficult process. You need incredible resilience, determination, and a strong support system to make it through.
It's clear this executive order has really stirred things up. People have strong opinions on both sides. But beyond the politics, the policy analysis, we can't forget the human cost. So we spent a lot of time, really digging into this executive order, looking at the arguments for and against it. But what does it all mean for us? Like for us as individuals, what can we do? How can we engage with this whole issue in a way that actually matters?
Well, I think the first thing is education, right? We got to take the time to really understand this whole thing, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, its history, what's worked, what hasn't. And we got to go beyond just the headlines. We need to hear the stories of refugees, their journeys, what they've been through, what they've accomplished.
It's true. It's so easy to get caught up in all the policy talk and forget about the human side of things. Reading those firsthand accounts, listening to interviews with refugees, that can be really powerful. It reminds us that these are real people with real lives.
Absolutely. And it's not enough to just passively consume information. We need to challenge our own assumptions, have conversations with people who see things differently, seek out different perspectives, be open to changing our minds.
I like that. Engage, challenge, be open. It's a good reminder that learning is an ongoing thing. There's always more to learn, more to understand. But what about action? What can we actually do to make a difference?
There's so much we can do. There are tons of organizations out there doing amazing work to support refugees here in the U.S. and all over the world. Volunteer your time, donate, or even just spread the word about what they're doing.
And don't forget about advocacy. Reach out to your elected officials. Let them know what you think and urge them to support policies that align with your values. Even small actions can make a difference.
This executive order, it sparked a really important conversation about the U.S.'s role in the world, our commitment to helping those in need, and how we balance security with compassion. By participating in that conversation, by being informed and active citizens, we can help shape a future that reflects what we believe in.
It's a good reminder that we're not just bystanders. We have a voice, and it's our responsibility to use it. This deep dive has been, well, it's been eye-opening for sure. It's made me think, and honestly, it's been a little emotionally heavy at times. But I feel like we've all learned a lot about this complex issue, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, and this executive order. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been great unpacking this with you. And remember, knowledge is power, but it's only really meaningful when we use it to do something good. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working towards a world that's more just, more compassionate, more welcoming to everyone.
That's it for our deep dive into the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those minds sharp.